How to cultivate orchids for ornamental plants at home for beginners. Orchid, known as Orchidaceae, is one type of ornamental flower plants that have a lot of habitat in the tropics, but there are also in the circumpolar area to the wet tropics. Orchid is a living plant attached to or hitched on another tree, but orchids are not parasitic flowers. Orchid plants are able to live independently even though they ride on other trees. For this reason, orchid flowers are often found in the forest attached to large trees and on the slopes of the mountain slopes. Every plant has its own characteristics, as well as orchids. General characteristics of orchid flowers, including insect-like form. Orchid flowers have a bright color. Has versatile roots. There are many types of orchid flowers including moon orchids, tiger orchids, soil orchids, black orchids, sugarcane orchids, and many others with many flower color variants. In Indonesia, there are about 3,500 species of orchids that are crossed with the most orchid species, namely Dendrobium orchids, because they are still affordable and have many colors. Because of the beauty of its flowers, orchids are widely used as ornamental plants, and this type of flower is one of the most popular ornamental plants for plant lovers. Well, this time we will discuss about how to grow, cultivation and care for orchid flowers. Here are ways to cultivate orchids for ornamental plants at home for complete beginners. 1. How to cultivate and take care of orchid flowers. Cultivation of orchids is quite easy as long as the treatment is done properly. Flower seeds can grow in various climates. Breeding orchids is also very easy, can be done in a natural way or with certain techniques. 2. How to plant orchid flowers. Generally, there are two types of orchids, namely epiphyte orchids and terrestris orchids or soil orchids. Epiphyte orchid is a type of orchid that lives attached to other plants but does not interfere with the plant, while the terrestris orchid is a type of orchid that lives in fertile humus. To cultivate orchid flowers, you must know the media or planting place that is suitable for the type of orchid itself. The cultivation of orchids is actually not too complicated. Even for planting orchid flowers, do not have to use pots, because orchid plants can stick to other plants. Although it will be maximal if you use a separate pot. 3. Good planting sites for planting orchid plants. Choose a planting location that has enough sun intensity, because the growth of this orchid plant is very affected by the intensity of the sunlight that is obtained. Try to adjust the type of orchid based on the level of sun intensity obtained so that orchids can grow optimally. Based on the level of intensity of the need for light, orchids are divided into 3 types, namely the first type of orchid plants that must be exposed to direct sunlight. The type of orchid that is suitable to be cultivated in open places is Vada orchids, Arachis orchids and Reathera orchids. The second type is the type of orchid that can grow well in a place that is not exposed to direct sunlight. The types of orchids that are suitable for this condition are Ascidium orchids, Dendrobium orchids, or Cattleya orchids. To plant this type of orchid flower, a special place must be prepared so that the orchid plants can grow optimally. The latter is the type of orchid that does not like being exposed to the sun, so it must place this orchid plant in a shady place. If you have a shaded yard, Paphiopedilum orchids and Phalaenopsis orchids are suitable for your ornamental plants. 4. Pay attention to the height of the orchid pot. In addition to environmental conditions, the height of the orchid planting location also affects the growth of cultivated orchids. Based on the height of the planting location, orchids are divided into 3 types. If you live in a location with an altitude of 1,001 meters above sea level, the type of orchid suitable for planting is Cymbidium orchids and Miltoia orchids. If you want to cultivate Dendrobium, Oncidium or Cattleyas orchids, you must place these plants at an altitude of 500 to 1000 meters above sea level. The third type is orchids that will grow optimally if placed at an altitude of 500 meters above sea level. One example of an orchid plant that grows at this height is orchids of the Vada and Arachis types. In addition to the height of the planting location, must also pay attention to the air circulation in the place. A great place for orchid growth is a place that has a gentle breeze. Another thing to note is the humidity of the air so that orchid plants can thrive and produce beautiful flowers. 5. Selection of orchid seeds. Before planting orchid flowers, you must choose seeds that have good quality. Choose seeds that are ready to be cultivated. Usually good seeds are seeds that are 1 year old and have leaves and roots. Plant the seeds into plastic for 3 months. Then transfer them to a small pot with a diameter of 6 to 12 inches. Give organic fertilizer during the nursery process so that maximum orchid growth. After 3 months in a small pot, orchid plants can be moved into larger pots. 6. Orchid plant care. In order for orchids to have maximum growth and have bright flower colors, there are several tips that can be done, including A. Root orchid seeds. After 3 months, usually the roots will start to grow and often come out of the ground. Seeing this situation, you might immediately re-enter the root that came out into the ground. But do not do that, because it will endanger the planted orchids. The best thing to do is to move the plant into a larger pot. B. Orchid stems. Some orchids sometimes have tall stems. To keep the rod from collapsing, it can use a support pole on the stem. This pillar is to ensure that the orchid stems can still stand upright. C. Place at the right temperature. Orchids will grow well in locations that have temperatures around 14 to 36 degrees Celsius. If you can maintain the temperature regularly, the orchid planted gives a beautiful flower more than expected. D. How to move orchids. Do not move orchids carelessly. Before removing orchid seeds, first prepare a new pot that will be used as a new place for orchids. After the new pot is ready, then move the orchid plant. Make sure the position is perfect and add a little other planting media such as chopped ferns. That's our video that discusses how to grow orchids for ornamental plants at home for beginners. Hopefully the video that we present can be useful for all of us. Also watch our next video every day at 6 p.m. See you later and thank you for visiting our channel.